business studies, ultimate guide to acing your HSC business studies exam as a revision lecture for your upcoming final exams. So this is run by KIS, an amazing group of tutors that work here, are also running different subjects, revision lectures. For English, that was yesterday, so you probably missed that out if you didn't attend it. But there's also Math Advanced, Chemistry, Physics, and Biology that's been run by these guys. And Manoj will put in the link to all that for you to see. All right, so just a bit about me. So it's a weird spelling of Alan, has the letter D at the end, but I just prefer to say it's the past tense of Alan, so it's Alan. I graduated from Sydney Boys High School in 2018. I scored a pretty good ATAR, and in business studies, I scored 96. And I actually did that as an accelerated subject in 2017. I managed to pay Nessa to get back my marks for the actual exam, my raw marks, because that is something you can do, I believe, after every HSC exam. And it turned out that my section score breakdowns were basically 17 for multiple choice, 38 for short answer, and then around averaging 19 for the 2 extended responses, just so you guys get an idea of the raw marks that are kind of expected for that kind of HSC mark. So with what I'm doing now, I'm currently at the University of Melbourne. I'm in Melbourne right now, so I'm really jealous that you're all out of lockdown and I still have to stay home. But it's not been too bad. I've had, some restrictions easing these days to see a few friends now and again. I'm studying biomedicine at the moment, and I'm starting my MD next year, either at Melbourne or Sydney. Still a bit undecided on that. In terms of what I do for hobbies, I love playing basketball. I do tutor a lot as well, and I do love a good party when we're not in lockdown. All right, we might as well just get into it. So as a brief overview of what we're doing today, we're going to be covering all 4 modules in the business studies course. So that's operations, marketing, finance, and human resources. Hopefully you'll all be familiar with that by now. So the principle behind these revision lectures is to basically see how I would go through, let's say, a short answer question or my thought process for a multiple choice question, plus some expert tips on answering those styles of questions, as well as the extended responses, which we'll cover at the end as well, with both the business report and the case studies type essay, where I'll give you guys some brief tips and just general advice on how to structure it, the kind of terminology you want to use, and how to differentiate your answers from everyone else. But to begin with, we're going to deal with each module separately, doing multiple choice and short answers. All right, so this is just a bit of an introductory slide. It's got the entire business studies syllabus on it. And it's basically just to show you that really you can summarize everything you're meant to know to like one slide or one page. It's not an enormous amount of information. And with business studies, one thing that I found while answering questions in my trials and even the final HSC is that the questions actually lead very nicely into the syllabus dot points. They use the words of the syllabus. They are looking for the subtitles under each dot point. So for example, if they ask about corporate social responsibility, which is on the left there, you are expected to write about legal compliance and ethical responsibility. You're expected to write about environmental sustainability and social responsibility. So those actually form part of your answers. And not going to lie, even when you don't really, even if you haven't formally learned something and you don't really know what the content was when you learned it, a lot of this is general knowledge, and you can just draw on your daily experience or what you've just read about some kind of business or what your understanding of a certain scenario is in the test to try and make up your answer using these keywords. And a lot of the time that can get you most of the marks, if not all of them. So it just comes down to practicing adapting your own knowledge and some of the more formal content, like KPIs. That's not something you would have heard day-to-day, key performance indicators. That's more of the terminology that you would have learned in the course that would differentiate your answer because it's something that's of high quality in your response. All right, so let's firstly talk about how your exam will be. And the timings I've got here are actually roughly what I did for my exams when I practiced and when I did my final HSC as well. So with reading time, you'll have 5 minutes to do that. You can't change how much reading time you have. So I also spent 5 minutes on reading time. But just briefly on what I did during that time, I scanned through the paper looking at especially the last two questions, the extended responses, to see which topics they were assessed, that they assessed. And then I came back all the way to the front to actually start on the multiple choice. I think that helped me get a bit of a head start on it, because timing is very, very important in this subject. You want to leave as much time as possible for your two essays at the end, so that you can write as much as possible and make sure the quality of a response is as high as possible by giving yourself an ample amount of time to do it. So I did the first 2 to 3, maybe 4 multiple choice questions. Then during the allocated multiple choice time, which they say to be like 35 minutes, which is way too much time, honestly, you can skim through most of the questions, and honestly, the answer should jump out at you most of the time. Do be careful when you're reading the question, because sometimes a little subtlety might change the answer. But with business studies, especially the first half of that multiple choice, they're going to be just straight up things you would have heard time and time again. They're not trying to be tricky. The occasional working out or problem solving type of question can come up, which is what I'm actually going to focus on a bit more today, because I think that's where most students might struggle with. And leading up to exams, you guys should be more familiar with the content now. So it's more so about applying it that I want to focus on with multiple choice. So dedicate about 15 minutes to that. With section 2, the short answers, they recommend about 1 hour and 35 minutes, but you can probably restrict yourself to about 65 minutes. Keeping to about roughly like 1.5 minutes per mark would be good there. And just make sure like you pace yourself. You don't need to go too fast. Put enough detail, but also don't overwrite. Section 3 and section 4, the essays, I tried to have at least 15 minutes for each of those. And sometimes you would have about a buffer of 5 minutes for either one, depending on which one you think you might need more time with. All right, so let's get into it. Now, I've started with this multiple choice question about a critical path analysis, and you guys can have a read of it, have a look at the diagram, and let me know what you guys think would be the answer here. And I'll explain how to do it for you after that. All right, Manoj, do you want to launch a poll for that?
Cool, I'll do it now.
All right, perfect.
Got some answers flowing in.
Awesome. Give you about another minute, 2 minutes if you need.
Whenever you want me to launch a poll, by the way, just let me know and then I'll launch it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, like what I just did with this one.
Perfect.
Okay, yeah, easy.
Cool.
All right.
So a lot of people have answered. I might share the results.
Sure. Yep. All right. So we've got about C and A being the most popular answers, with C being the leading one, 65% of people putting C. And C is the correct answer. And I'll explain why that is. So with a critical path analysis, remember that your critical path is actually the longest amount of time in which you can complete all tasks simultaneously. So what I mean by that is, let's say if we start at A, you have to spend 1 day, that's fine. Then we have an option to go down C or B. We've got 4 or 3. And then you can clearly see with G that that's actually 10 days after that. So if you add up C and G, which is 14, that's going to cover every other task above it if you check. So in that 14 days, you can go through B, E, and I, because that's 3 plus 2 is 5 plus 4 is 9. So that's still less than 14. If you go via C and then F and then I, that adds up to 4 plus 3 is 7 plus 4 is 11, still covered within that 14 days of C and G. If you go up to B, which is 3 days, then D, which is 1 day, that's 4, then back down with H, which is 3 days, that's 7, which is also less than 14. So that means we need to actually pick our CG path so that we can make sure we we can complete everything else simultaneously. So we add our 1 day from task A to the 4 and 10 days from C and G, which gives us 15, and then 2 days for task J, giving us 17, which is the answer here. All right. And if you guys have any questions about that, or you want me to go over it again, just feel free to put questions in the Q&A. And I am going to prioritize answering questions about the questions that I go over more specifically. Then if there's any other general kind of question, I'll do that. And they'll all come in the question time. You'll see very clearly like the slide for that. All right, so let's move on to the next one. So I decided to put in another critical path analysis, and this is laid out a bit differently. So just for those of you that have seen this a few times already, this might seem a bit different because you can see that the task is actually at the nodes rather than over the arrows. And this is the most recent, one of the most recent papers, 2019 paper, where I think what they were trying to do is try and push a few people outside of their comfort zone. It's not as typical of all the other critical path analyses you've seen, because it might not make sense at first. Like, why is the task not related to the day? What does 1 day between task A and B mean? But that's not to say that you can't answer this question. And so I've put this here for you guys to maybe spend a bit more time to think about and still apply what you know to that question. So if you could launch the poll, Manoj, to see what people say about these two questions. So both 19 and 20 are related to this. Then I'll go through it after that.
I think we've had quite a few answers, so I'll share the results here.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so we've got decent split. We've got 15% with A, 25% with B, 10% with C, and 50% of people saying D. So the correct answer is actually D. So half of you got it right. Good job. So to understand how this works, I think the first thing you should do is maybe put in some kind of system for yourself. So it is a bit flexible with this question, but the way I approach this is to begin task A. That's where the start point is. So you don't really need any time to begin it. But then to complete it, it takes 1 day so that you can begin task B. And then you can use that system for all the other branches. So finishing, and actually one other point I'd like to highlight is when it branches out, like in task B, where we've got 1 day to task E and then 1 day to task D and 3 days to task C, you can think of that as the different components of task B. So while you're completing task B, perhaps one of the components of that takes only 1 day, and that's the component that's necessary to then start task E. So that's the branches going up. Whereas task B has another component that takes a day, which you need to complete before starting task D. And 3 days for that final component where it has to be finished before task C can begin. Then if you use that kind of system towards task D, which is what this is asking about, what that means is task F is going to take a day to finish before we can begin task D. Task B is going to take a day to finish before we can do task D. Task C is going to take 2 days. So we need to actually have finished all of these before we can think about even doing task D. All right. And this framework is adequate to get you to your final answer. There is a little bit of flexibility in saying, do we need to include task G or that extra day? Obviously, you don't need to complete task G before you do task D because it comes after it. But that 1 day that you need to complete task D, it's still very irrelevant to this question. You can see G doesn't come up obviously in any of these. So that's why the framework of saying you need to complete all the other tasks before you begin it, and that's the amount of days that they've written there, works. So that's why D is the correct answer here. You need to finish everything else before you begin, let alone complete task D. Okay, so that's question 19. Can we also get a poll up for question 20 now? So have a read and think about what this change might do.
We'll give people 10 more seconds.
Yeah.
All right, got 20 answers. Let's take a look.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so we've got a majority of people going with C, 70% of you guys, and that is the correct answer. So it says improving technology reduces time between C and D to 1 day. So now between C and D, instead of 2 days, it's 1 day. What is the new length of the critical path? So the first question didn't ask about the critical path, but this does. So it turns out that the A to B, B to C, C to D, D to G branch remains to be the critical path. It's the amount of time that you need to complete everything else simultaneously, all the E to F and B to D tasks. So that means we just simply add up 1 from A to B, 3 from B to C, giving us 4, and then from C to D is another one giving us 5, and then from D to G is another one giving us 6, which is option C. All right, this next question is more of a theory-based one. It says businesses experiencing increasing costs for stock over time. It's seeking to maximize profits for the current financial period. Which strategy should it adopt to value its inventory? So I'll give you guys about maybe 30 seconds for this one, and then I'll go through it.
Just going to turn my camera off for a bit, Alan, but I'll just launch a poll whenever you go in your question.
Sure, perfect. It's only the multiple choice that will poll for.
Ah, cool, gotcha.
Right. So majority of you guys put C, just in time. So the answer actually here was A, which only 6% of you put, which is first in, first out. Now, the reason for this is I know you guys have learned about just in time as being the optimal way of managing stock. But when you talk about this in a financial sense, just in time is more of, it's not really the same as first in, first out, last in, first out, which are actually the two possible answers here. First in, first out, last in, first out. They're to do with valuing inventory. Just in time is more so about inventory management, where you get rid of the stock as soon as it is ordered, just in time. But, and then the other thing is just in case, obviously, is instantly eliminated. It's just a bit of a gag they like to keep bringing up. And then back then, and even nowadays, I've seen just in case as an option. So that's obviously out of it. And just in time is actually ruled out because it does say, how do we value the inventory? So this means we're looking at the difference between whether we use the costs of our most recent stock to value our inventory or the costs of our older stock to value inventory. And the rule you want to keep in mind here is, in general, the costs are going to increase over time. So what that means is, if you want to maximize profit in the current financial period, you want to use the stock that you have now. Because if you use the cost of stocks that come about in the future, then that's going to actually be more expensive, and it reduces your profits. So that's what last in, first out would be. So if you use the costs of the stock that you just bought, which is more expensive than the stock that you've initially bought, then that's going to be more deleterious to your profit. It's going to detract from your profit. Okay, so I think I said when I was explaining first in, first out that you base it off the costs of what you just bought. It's basing it off the costs of the first stock you had, and that was cheaper back then. So that means now your profit is going to be higher, and that's what they want to do. First in, first out in general. It gets a bit confusing because you need to think of it as like, in the moment, whatever is coming in, I'm using that cost now, so that in future, I don't use these costs, because these costs are going to be lower than in the future. Okay, so in that situation, it will be first in, first out. All right. So now we can do a short answer question for operations. North Coast Manufacturing making customized furniture for its clients. How could technology influence the transformation process at North Coast? And then part B says North Coast Manufacturing is currently planning a new factory. Explain 2 factors that it should consider when designing process layout. Then part C, recommend a method of monitoring effectiveness. So that's just a brief scan of each one. Let's look at each part in a bit more detail. And what I like to do for these short answer questions is always look at 2 things: the key verbs and the keywords. So the key verbs, there's actually a list on NES's website about a glossary of key verbs, and it tells you exactly what they expect from an explain question, an outline question, a discuss question. But more recently, they've started to use words like how and why. So it's become a bit more of a task to actually parallel these with the key verbs. So in this example where it says how could technology influence transformation process, we should see that as more of an explain question, relating cause and effect. That's how. So the keywords here would be technological influences and transformation processes. And if we look at the marking criteria first, before we look at a sample response, the other thing I wanted to highlight is, for 1 mark, it's quite generous. So usually for half marks or 1 mark, it's quite generous, especially for the lower mark question. So it says provide some relevant information about the transformation process. So as long as you mention some kind of like technology and talk about how that might make the transformation process more efficient, you get at least 1 mark. And to get the full marks, to provide how technology influences the transformation process at North Coast Manufacturing, the difference there is emphasizing how it's an influence. So emphasizing the effects. So that's why in this sample answer, we've firstly introduced that implementation of robotics technology. And then this is another strategy. You want to use the name of the business in these short answer questions, and also in the business report later on. You want to actually use it so that your market can see you're relating it to the scenario. So implementation of robotics technology to North Coast Manufacturing's transformation processes can improve the efficiency and quality of furniture production, because robotic machinery can piece together inputs more accurately and more quickly, and increased efficiency will reduce lead times, making the transformation process more profitable. So you can see that there's always something more you can actually do when you're answering these questions. And one thing I'll show you later is when we get like an outline question, which is just briefly sketching in general terms. What you should actually try and do is maybe aim for a describe. Whereas when it's a describe, maybe aim for an explain. Don't actually change this style of writing. So explain means cause and effect, but just with the level of detail. If you put a little bit more of detail and treat it as if it's maybe worth another mark than what it says, you're going to safeguard yourself from missing out on marks. And this is more so a strategy if you're trying to like maximize your marks in short answer. If instead you're finding it difficult to keep up with the time and you find that like the time runs out very quickly, then definitely try and make your answers as concise as possible. So it's really going to depend where you're at currently, how to improve. You just need to make sure you use these samples that are provided to you to see what's about an optimal like length of an answer and an optimal detailed answer. All right, the next one is an explain question. It said, North Coast Manufacturing is currently planning a new factory. Explain 2 factors that it should consider when designing the process layout. So our key verb is explain. We need cause and effect. Keywords are to. So I put this here because instructions are very, very important in these questions. So if they say to, don't give 1, don't give 3, give 2. And then the other keyword here is the process layout. So that's the syllabus keyword that we want to relate our answer to. In the marking criteria, you can see there's that range from 1 to 4 marks. For 1 mark, you just make some relevant statement. It's a free mark, pretty much, if you don't leave it blank. Provide, for 2 marks, provide how and or why, or identify 2 factors. So by simply just listing 2 factors, you can probably get 2 marks. But of course, we don't want to do that. We want to have full sentence answers and try to get the higher band marks, 3 and 4. So to get 3 marks, you need to follow the instructions. You need to have an explanation. So provide how and or why 1 factor may influence the process layout and identify a 2nd factor. You need to at least have the 2 factors there. And you can maybe sort of get away with not explaining 1 of them to get 3 marks. But if you explain both of them, if you relate cause and effect, both of them, clearly structure your answer so that you have a decent amount of information about each way or each factor, then you will get the 4 marks. So for example, we can open up with a definition. I like to do that a lot just so I can get into the zone of writing and so I can recollect the thoughts. That doesn't mean include irrelevant information. It does have to be about like the keywords in the question. So we can introduce our answer by saying the process layout is the arrangement of machines so that the machines and equipment are grouped together according to the functional process that they perform. Since North Coast Manufacturing produces furniture, so we're relating it to the question here, 2 factors that they should consider are the relative positions of manufacturing stations and the proximity of finished goods with transport outside of the factory. So what that means is we want to keep the different stations where intermediate goods move on from one to another as close as possible. And we want it to be organized in a way that minimizes inefficiencies. And that's what we are going to say in explanation. So firstly, it is imperative that the intermediate products can be smoothly transferred from one workstation to another so that inefficiencies are avoided and damage can be minimized. And then on the second reason, you need to explain that as well. Secondly, by locating the station where products are finished close to the site of transport out of the factory, we can minimize the bottlenecks. So bottlenecks between the finished products and exportation of those products, which would be like the warehouses or customers, can be avoided. And this will reduce lead times and improve distribution efficiency. So in that way, we've explained both our factors and we would get 4 marks. All right, the last part of this was a 2-marker recommend question. So this means we want to suggest something. So the keywords here, 1 being 1 reason because it said they didn't highlight it like before, but does mean 1. So stick to it. Monitoring effectiveness and process layout. So those are the keywords. All right, so with the marking criteria to get 2 out of 2, you just need to provide a method of monitoring with a reason in favor of that method. So recommending is you putting forward something that should be done. So obviously you don't want to talk about like the disadvantages of a method after that. That's going to counteract your recommendation. So that's kind of like the no-no there. All right, so monitoring the process layout at North Coast Manufacturing will entail measuring performance of the new process layout against performance of the old layout through a key performance indicator, a KPI, such as lead times. By comparing the old and new layouts time from starting the manufacturing process to the time of transporting the finished goods out, the new layout can be monitored for how effective it is so that control and improvement can be applied accordingly. All right, so that's clearly backing up why we've suggested this. So we've suggested to use a KPI like lead times. And the reason for this is because we can clearly compare the old layout with the new one so that we can monitor how effective it is. All right, so that is operations done. So we've got our first question time slide now. Take a bit of time to think of anything and I'll have a look through the questions that have come through to me. And we'll basically just spend the next like 4 or 5 minutes answering those. All right.
I think a question has just popped up in the messenger, but if you guys have any questions, just feel free to throw them into the Q&A.
Are KPIs the only monitoring and controlling technique? So KPIs are the main points you want to bring up because there's so many of them, right? So try to learn about them. So there's quality, there's lead times, which I had in that example. There's going to be cost. It's quite flexible as long as you sort of say it's a KPI, it's going to already improve your answer. I don't think it would be the only ways. There was also in the syllabus, if we go back to that slide, very clearly it said under monitoring and control, I'll just show you real quick, monitoring and control, transfer. All right. On resources. Oh, actually, no, sorry, I didn't say it here. Yeah, monitoring, control, and improvement. There are under marketing like revenue controls and cost controls and things like that, but that's under the marketing segment. So for operations, try to stick with the KPIs. I think that is better because it does relate to some of the other processes like in marketing and finance, but you would have learned about those different techniques in those topics. So if you know it's a question about operations, try to mention what you've learned in that topic. So which would be KPIs. All right. Let's see where we were. All right. No one's told me that I look like The Weekend. That was an easy one. A KPI for engineers. So keep your questions coming in, and I'll have a look through at the Q&A as well.
There's a few in the Q&A. Can you see them?
Yeah, I'm just reading through them. So one of them is, how do you learn to write concise? So that's very difficult because, and that was something I struggled with at the beginning as well, is how to actually condense that information down so that you don't run out of time or you don't waste your words. I would suggest that you do some draft essays first, maybe with your notes open, and then maybe leave it for a while and come back to it and read over what you've written. And you'll find that it's actually quite easy to spot where you've wasted words because you're going to get lazy reading it and you'll be like, I just said this, or I just repeated this. What's the point of me saying this? So I would suggest maybe focus on bringing up new points. That's how you try to be concise, and don't fluff on about the same things. So also don't be afraid to use dot points within your business reports and essays. But it's not the kind of dot points that you would see like on this kind of slide. You need to introduce it. You need to say like the following influences on operations are involved in the managing of this business or whatever. And then you would have full sentence dot points, but that can help you be concise and bring up new points so that you don't spend lines and lines and lines about one thing. And it is a relevant question. Someone said it's irrelevant. It is quite relevant, but for later on, that's true. And we're only doing multiple choice and short answer. If you're talking about how to be concise in short answer, stick to the marking scheme and make a maybe a little like marking criteria for yourself where you think you're going to hit those four points if it's out of 4. Might answer one more and then before we move on. Did you write a business report? Any other subject? Did you write a business report for section 4 or wrote an essay format? So I'll answer that later on. You can write a business report, but it does just need to have that case study paragraph. The way I did that, I'll mention this later, is I had a paragraph for my main theory and then a case study after it, and then just repeat that. And you can number it just like a business report, have your heading numbers and subheading numbers, but try not to mention like this report or anything like that, because it's more of an extended response essay as opposed to a business report. All right, well, keep your questions coming in and I'll answer more essays related stuff later on. All right, so let's get into marketing. We can start off with this question. So have a read and let me know what you guys think is the answer by popping it into the poll. If you could launch that, Manoj. Right, 30 seconds for that.
All right, there we go.
All right. So the reason I put this question in is because it's actually one of the dot points that's quite overlooked, the marketing approaches one. It's in the role of marketing, but it does come up sometimes, and it's important to understand the difference between the different approaches. So just reading it says a business develops a shirt made from fabric which never stains or looks crushed. It then runs an advertising campaign to inform people about this product. So the answer here is actually D. It's the selling approach. And I think only 33% of you picked that. 57% of you said it's the marketing approach. And I think this is the misconception that I was expecting as well. So most of you would have learned about the marketing approach and how that's more of like a modern approach to marketing, which involves doing market research, understanding what customers' wants and needs are, and then designing products or designing your marketing campaign around that. So there's more of a customer focus. But in this question, we're told that they've already made the product. They've already done the research into like what this can do, and it doesn't stain or look crushed. But it's after all this is done that they then go to the wider market and inform people about it. It's not like they asked them in the first place, are you looking for a shirt that's never stained? Since there's no information about that, what our answer should be here is the selling approach, D. And the selling approach is when we focus on using, well, this is like from some of the notes I had, using like high pressure tactics to try and sell what you have, to try and promote what's already been made, as opposed to the marketing approaches, which involves more so the customers just buying it because they clearly wanted it in the first place. All right. And industrial is not really one of the approaches at all. So you can eliminate A straight away. Production is also not correct. That's a very outdated kind of marketing approach, which is more focused on just if we make it, they'll buy it because it's an essential product, like baked beans back in the day, or like toothbrushes. But yeah, in this case, it would be the selling because they do the advertising after it's made. All right. Next question. So sometimes I've included this because sometimes they include a pictorial for you to look in at a bit more with a bit more detailed and a keener eye, just so that you can understand what kind of dot point this is asking for. It's not as clear or explicit as some of the other questions. So have a look at it and I'll give you guys about a minute to pop your answers in.
Cool. I'll share the results.
Right. Yep, so a lot of you, 85% of you said D, price discrimination, and that's exactly correct. So you can see that what's different between these two bottles is one's for teenagers and one's for adults, and they're priced differently, even though everything else is the same. So that means they are actually discriminating between these two different demographics, marking up the price for teenagers for some reason. And that's exactly right. Most of you got that. All right. With price leading, skimming, and penetration, those are quite irrelevant to this question. So price leading, price skimming being where you charge what's like pretty much a premium in your market. Price penetration usually being the entry level product where you make it a bit lower. Price leading isn't really a thing. Loss leading is the correct term for that one, which is when you actually price your product underneath what it costs to make it, so that you attract customers to the store, but then hopefully they buy other things. And that's all pretty much irrelevant in this question. So that's another way to determine that D is the answer. All right, cool. So let's move on. Question 5 says a manufacturer sells her organic meals only to major supermarkets. Which distribution channel has the manufacturer chosen? So this is just testing if you understand the difference between, I'm not going to say which ones here because one of them is completely wrong, but the difference between different types of distribution channels. Let me know what you guys think. All right, maybe another 10, 15 seconds for that.
Cool. I'll just share the results.
Yeah, great. Yep, so most of you, 74% of you said C, and that's the correct answer. 20% of you said A, which I guess would be another possible answer. So exclusive, intensive, and selective are the three distribution channels. Here, we're told that the manufacturer is selling the meals only to major supermarkets. And while that makes it sound exclusive, exclusive is actually a step up from that. It's where it's so hard to get that there's probably only one store in the entire country or maybe even the entire world. So this is with things like Goyard, I think it's a very hard, like high-end luxury brand that's quite difficult to purchase their products from because they have limited run and very limited locations where they actually sell it. So that's what exclusive is kind of reserved for. In the middle ground is selective. So this is actually the answer here, selective, because while we're not selling it everywhere, we are selling in supermarkets. And major supermarkets, you would know that there are quite a few, even just within like Sydney or within a particular city, there's already multiple. So what that means is this type of distribution channel that we're looking for is one where customers are prepared to travel to go to because they're seeking this desired product, but it's also not so exclusive as to it being inaccessible in some parts of the world. So that's why selective is the answer here. Intensive is even more available and even more accessible. So think of products that are available at like a corner store or a 7-Eleven. That would be intensive. So in this case, C was the answer. All right, let's have a look at this one. So we've got Sam being asked by a company to participate in a survey on home security. After a few questions, she's asked if she would like to purchase a burglar alarm from the company. What strategy is the company using?
Give people 10 more seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Let me share this.
Yep, so most people actually got this correct, which is great to see. So B was the correct answer. About 90% of you chose that, whereas a few of you fell into the trap of A, which is saying that sugging is illegal. So for those of you that don't know, sugging pretty much stands for, I think it's under the guise of a survey, selling under the guise of a survey. I forgot the S for some reason. Selling under the guise of a survey. So with sugging, although it's unethical, it's actually not illegal. So you can actually have people come up to you that pretend to be doing market research, and then all of a sudden, at the very end of it, you might realize there's a bit of bias in the questions, and they're trying to lean towards something, make a point with the survey questions they have. At the end of it, they might turn around to you and say, oh, we have something that would actually help you with all your needs, and it's this product, and they'll try to sell it to you. So I'm guessing a lot of you knew what sugging was already, because that's where a majority of you picked A and B, but it is not illegal. And that's the point I wanted to highlight with this. It is legal, but unethical. It's underneath the unethical dot point. All right. Let's have a look at this question. So this is more of a problem-solving one, not very typical of marketing, but it is related to it. So have a minute or two, maybe looking at the table there and working out which answer is correct out of those. This type of question is probably going to involve you eliminating some answers first and then figuring out what's best.
Might give people a tiny bit extra time just because everyone's a bit slower to answer this. We'll maybe give them 15 seconds.
Of course, of course. So it might take a little bit longer.
All right, I'll share the results.
All right, great. Let's see them. So majority of people picked the right answer again here, which is great. Under contention was B with that. So D was the correct answer here. All right. So this might seem a little bit outside the comfort zone for most people. There's this, this column at the very end, which says a variance from target, 20, and then it's a percentage. You've got 25%, negative 50%, negative 25. And this isn't really something you might have learned about in business studies, but that's not to say this stops you from getting this question right. So what that's referring to is whether that salesperson outdid their expectations and sold more. So a positive 25%, you can interpret that to be they went 25% over what their target was. Whereas a negative number would mean they didn't meet their target. For example, negative 50% means they didn't meet it by half. They only sold half as much as what they were supposed to. All right, so that's the first thing to understand. The next thing is, if you look at the answer options, we have two things to compare. We have the sales people themselves and the sales regions. So we've got region A, B, C. So I think what's easier here to do first is actually the regions, to determine which regions are most successful. And what success means, or can be interpreted to be in this question, is how well the actual sales compare to the planned sales. So you can see that the actual sales are actually the same for all of them, $1 million for region A, B, and C. But region A planned to have sales of 1,200,000, whereas region B met their target of 1 million exactly, and region C outdid or exceeded their expectations and only targeted 800,000, whereas they actually made 1 million. All right, so that means region C can be deemed the most successful, whereas region A would be the most unsuccessful. So if we look at the answer options, we can already eliminate some based on that. So A says 1 is the least successful in the least successful region. So that's kind of correct so far, because A is the least successful region. Salesperson 4 is the most successful in the least successful region. So salesperson 4 is in region B. That's not in the most or least successful region. So that's not an answer option. B is not an answer option. That's correct. Salesperson 7 is the least successful person in the most successful region. So 7 is in the most successful region. That's correct. And then salesperson 8 is the most successful salesperson in the most successful region. So that's also correct with the region. But now let's look at 1. Is salesperson 1 the least successful person in region A? He's not, because he or she is not, because clearly 25% as a positive number, that means they are outdoing or exceeding their potential, whereas 2 and 3 are not as good because they're selling less than what they need to. Salesperson 7, so going to option C now, they are not the least successful because salesperson 9 is the least successful person in region C. They've actually just met their targets. That's what 0% variance means. It means they didn't exceed or score or sell less than what they were targeting. So that leaves D as our correct answer. Salesperson 8 is the most successful person in region C because they've got 50% variance, which positive 50%, which means they made a lot more than salesperson 7 did. All right, and that's relative to their targets as well. And they are in region C, which is the most successful. So D is the right answer there. Okay, great. So we can move on to the short answer questions for marketing now, and I'll go through this with you guys. So it says business sells luxury cars. The cars are stylish, high performance, and include advanced safety features, integrating leading edge technology. Part A says to describe one factor influencing customer choice for 3 marks. B, explain the interdependence between marketing and finance for 4 marks. And then C, why is it important for the business to conduct market research? All right, we'll go straight into A, which is describing one factor influencing customer choice. So the key verb here would be describe, which means we want characteristics and features. And the key words are 1, because we need to give 1 influence of customer choice. So the staple here would be sociocultural features. That's really what this is leading towards, because we can see that they're selling high-end luxury cars, which is part of someone's socioeconomic class, social class, which means that sociocultural features is what we should go for here, and particularly their social class. So we can open up by saying open our answer by saying sociocultural features include influences exerted by peers, family, and social class. For this business, customers of a high social class would likely purchase an expensive car because it has the improved safety features and performance aspects. Peers and family would also influence the choice of this choice, as the customer would want to fit in with their expectations. High income earners may also be influenced by peers to purchase a high-end vehicle as a status symbol. So that's all underneath this one factor influencing customer choice, which is sociocultural features. And we've given enough information or enough detail there that paints this picture or gives the characteristics and features of our sociocultural influences. So that's how we get the 3 marks. And you can see from the marking scheme, just mentioning like a factor and writing something about it is already 1 out of 3. Sketching in general terms, 1 factor would be 2. So that's if you have a bit less detail. I like to think of it as the number of points that I have. So here, the 3 points would be, well, first of all, having the sociocultural features as our answer, then 2 things about it at least. So we've talked about how it relates to the target market and how peers and family would also influence that. Okay, cool. So that's part A. Part B is an explain question. So we can go back to that. It says, explain the interdependence between marketing and finance. Interdependence is something that comes up quite often. You would have seen by now that it's pretty much in all 4 modules. It's within the role. So I thought it'd be appropriate to talk about it here. Key verb here is explain, and the keywords interdependence, marketing, and finance are the 2 we're looking at. So it's good to start with a definition first. Interdependence is the mutual reliance, or you could say the codependence of one function on another in order to meet the goals of the business synergistically. That's what I've added. For this business, finance will provide marketing with funds to undertake market research to understand which demographics are a suitable target market that will be most effective to advertise to. Management of finance is also important in allowing for the funding and development of a marketing plan to ensure strategies are put into place to attract customers and persuade them to buy the prestigious car. So this is all talking about how finance is pretty much like being the backbone, how finance serves as a backbone for marketing in this case. So that's just some examples we've done, and that's only half our answer, because interdependence is both ways. We need to also demonstrate that we understand marketing can serve as the backbone for finance. So it's kind of like a cycle where if you have successful financial management, then that's going to lead to successful marketing, and successful marketing is going to come back to help finance, because especially with marketing, you want to focus on how it's a revenue center and how that's how you get exposure. That's how you're going to increase your income. So that's the second part of our answer. Marketing is then responsible for generating sales and therefore revenue that is necessary for the financial department to work with, who will be responsible for budgeting for the whole business according to that revenue, including providing funds to marketing again. So you can relate it back to how it comes back to marketing. In these ways, the marketing and finance functions of the business, of this business, are codependent, and together successful management of marketing and finance will ensure that the business goals are achieved. All right, and then the marketing criteria is there for you guys to see as well. You can see that our explain question is about providing why or not how. That's kind of what they've changed it to be in more recent years. All right, next part C, why is it important for this business to conduct market research? So our why question here, I think I didn't update the marketing criteria, sorry about that. But if we just look at the keywords with this one, we've got market research is now the focus. And whenever we see why, I like to think of it as an explain and justify question. So what that means is we want to be relating cause and effect, but also backing up our answer with some justification, because that's your reasons why. Okay, so market research is the process of collecting, recording, and analyzing information that can aid in the choosing of a target market and the design of a marketing plan. So opening statement to define our keyword, marketing research. And keep in mind that the question was asking, why is it important to conduct it? So now that we know what it is, we can relate it to why it's important. It is important for this business to undertake market research because it will allow them to be well informed about the target market's needs and wants, which will allow this business to implement effective marketing strategies. High-end luxury cars would attract a high price. So this is how we relate it to the scenario. It's very important, and this is what's actually going to differentiate a lot of people's answers, how well they integrate the scenario into their response. So we've mentioned very clearly, high-end luxury cars are going to be priced highly. So we need effective market research, or we can say it's important because it's going to ensure the marketing strategies are targeted at a high socioeconomic group in an affluent area, for example, where the safety features, the leading edge technology, and the status symbol of this business's products are going to be valued by its customers. So we're relating multiple parts to what's going to show our market that we deserve pretty much full marks for this. And then we can wrap up by saying, so with justified questions especially, you should give the perspective of what would happen if you didn't undertake market research or whatever the question might lead to. You want to provide the perspective of not doing that thing so that you can demonstrate why it's important. So we can say without accurate market research, it may be very difficult for the business to actually achieve its marketing objectives of having a strong position in the market and increasing its sales. All right, so that's very clearly backing up our reasons why it's important. All right, so we have another question time. If you guys want to pop stuff in the chat, and I'll look at everything.
Quite a few questions in the Q&A, I think.
Q&A, yeah, no worries. So I've got one saying, did you memorize the syllabus? And if so, what was the most effective way to do this? I know at the time where I sat my HSC, I would try rewrite the dot points of the syllabus, maybe not word for word, but you can clearly see by structuring it and seeing the similarities or the parallels between the different modules like operations, finance, marketing, how they're all split into role, influences, processes, strategies, and then effectiveness for human resources. You can then break that down for each one. So for role, that's another thing that's repeated across the four is you have like interdependence, you have the strategic role, but then with influences, it starts becoming a little bit different for each one. So that's when what I did was actually write out like the syllabus pretty much a couple times, especially in the lead up to an exam. I would see if I remembered it. It's definitely not necessary to memorize it, but it would help, and it would be great in helping you structure your responses and know that you're answering it using the correct dot point. So I think it does help if you memorize. It's not too difficult of a task if you memorize that syllabus. I recommend as the best way to study for operations. That was from a while ago. So I don't think there's any particularly good way to study for a particular module. Like it doesn't really change. Study techniques are something you can work on. So I would say at this stage, you would have already seen the content once. Perhaps you've got notes about it, about operations. And now it's more so how to adapt that to exams. So it is an exam that you're studying for, not how much you know. So you don't actually need to know everything. You need to get into the habit of using the limited information, sometimes limited information that you have, to try and expand on that or use the scenario within your answer. That kind of thing is going to help you do better in your exam. I don't think there's a particular way you can study for operations. I will say though, for each module, focus on strategies because that's the most technical out of the four subparts. Strategies is usually where you learn more content as opposed to just general knowledge, which is from the previous three. All right. Let's see. I'll just click answer those as well. Oh, do you recommend we study our case study? The Qantas case study, for example, is half the size of a textbook. Yep, I'll get to case studies at the end and what I did for that. But long story short, there's two things you can do. First of all, pick malleable facts that you can adapt to different questions or different topics within operations. For example, the same fact you can talk about different dot points. And also don't be afraid to make things up. So you can just become good at making it seem legit. And I did this for like quite a few times, actually. If you just read enough of it, you don't actually need to remember the details. You just need to pick up on the terminology, pick up on how to make it flow with your case study essay by providing new points each time. And really, you can make things up that seem to be relevant. So you could get away with it if you make it seem legit. All right, I think that's probably enough. We can maybe do one more. If you fake stuff and they find out, will you lose marks? Honestly, it's very hard for them to find out. What I mean by faking is like more so a statistic. And you can be a little bit more vague about like when this happened. Or so you can't fake features of like the iPhone because that's common knowledge. But you can twist certain things in a way that makes it seem like you're more well researched. And that's generally not going to be spotted. If you think about how many people they're marking and how many questions this marker has seen, if anything, a statistic or a fact that you're relating to your dot point well using some business is going to be seen as you doing your research or knowing what you're talking about, rather than them trying to say, oh, this is not true. I guess for that, if you pick maybe slightly less popular businesses, that could help as well. I know I did Apple and IKEA. So IKEA maybe was maybe a bit more on the low. I don't think that many people did it. But yeah, if you pick a slightly less popular business, then you can get away with it more easily as well. All right, we might save the other questions for later so we can move on. All right. So finance, let's start with this multiple choice. So with finance, I've included a lot of calculation questions because that's typically where a lot of students fall down in, and it isn't too hard once you get the hang of it, once you've seen how to do these. All right, so maybe spend 3-ish minutes on these two questions. Actually, we'll do question 11 first. So maybe spend 2 minutes on that. And then a minute after that, I'll give you guys 12.
Cool. We'll give people like 5-10 more seconds.
Yeah, that would be great. And I can also see in the Q&A, someone said like when he means fake it, it means like Qantas made $250 million in loyalty scheme, realistic but made it. Yeah, exactly. So with the numbers, feel free to include them even if you feel like you forgot. There's not really much point knowing the exact figures as long as you know what the general like loyalty scheme is like. You can talk about it.
Cool.
Right.
Share the answers.
Yeah, let's see what everyone said. So most people said B, and that was the correct answer for question 11. Good job. Not too difficult, not a trick question. The equity that he has in this business is going to be the sum of capital and net profits. So simply adding those two up is going to be 35,500. So if you guys could now do, oops, sorry about that, 12 as well.
We'll give them like 10 more seconds, I think.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
All right, so most of you put B, which is the correct answer, and some of you put unable to be calculated, which is, I guess, correct if you don't know how to calculate it, but that's not the question they're asking here, is if you can calculate it or not, is if you can do it using the information or not. The question mark might have been the other reason why you guys might have picked that solution, which might seem like you can't do it, but actually you can go back to your principles of a balance sheet to work out what that question mark is first. And you actually have to do that for this question. So adding up the total liabilities, adding up 5,000, 5,500 for the current liabilities, and then the 100,000 and your total equity, so basically your entire right side, I think you get a sum of, I don't have it here with me, but I can do it quickly, 5,000 plus 5,500, 100, 1, 2, 3, just so you guys can check you did it right numerically, plus 22,700, 12,800 is 146,000 on the right side. And that has to be balanced on the left. It has to be the exact same sum on the left where you add up the current assets and non-current assets. So if we take this 146,000 and take away every number we have on our left column, so 15,000, 3,000, 40,000, 85,000, that's going to leave us with the value of our stock, the question mark. So we take 146,000 and subtracting those, I think from memory it was 3,000 when I did it earlier. Yeah, so it's $3,000 for the stock. And now that you have stock, we can apply that to our current ratio. So the current ratio, the good thing about final HSC exams, even though they might have not done this in your trials, is with the finance topic, they give you the equations for each of the ratios. So you don't really need to memorize them, but you do need to know what they mean. So with the current ratio, we divide current assets by current liabilities, which means we add up our 15,000 of cash, 3,000 of accounts receivable, and the 3,000 we just calculated for current assets, then sorry, for the stock, so that we get our total current assets, and we divide that by our total current liabilities, which would be 5,000 for accounts payable and 5,500 for our overdraft. And that as a ratio gives us 2. So this is actually what's recommended for most businesses, to have a current ratio of 2 to 1, to have current assets double your current liabilities so that you're liquid. And it's important in a question to actually relate that to industry averages though. If we look at the bottom box, it does say the industry standard current ratio is 1.9 to 1. So our 2 to 1, it's above 1.9, but that doesn't mean it's too high. Too high would be something ridiculous, like close to 3.5, 3.5, maybe even 4. That's what they would make the answer in this case, so that you pick the option too high. But in general, it's good to be liquid, and being even slightly above the industry average is good, let alone acceptable, which is the correct answer here. It's not dangerously low, and it is possible to calculate it. We just did it. All right, so that was B. Okay, so everyone have a read of this question and let me know what you think in the poll, what you think the answer is.
Give people 10 more seconds or so.
Yeah, that would be great. Maybe another 10 seconds.
All right, cool.
Okay, let's see the answers. All right, awesome. So some people said A, some people said C, no one put B, and the majority of you put D, which ended up being the correct answer. So I actually put this question in because it was in my exam, the 2017 exam, and it's something I sat and I think I overthought. And this is why I put it here as a warning for you guys, because a lot of the time you can look too much into things. So what I did when I sat down and looked at this question is said that we have assets and total sales for each business. And we haven't actually learned any ratios that deal with those two. So if you think about the ratios you've learned, current ratio, expense ratio, gross profit ratio, none of them take like assets and divided by total sales or vice versa. So I didn't think there would be an appropriate ratio to calculate. And the other point is we don't actually know these businesses are in the same industry at all. So why would we need to compare them? But you should always take a step back and say, is this really what they're getting at? Are they trying to trick me here to picking comparative ratio analysis, which is usually going to be the answer here, because what we're doing is choosing between different businesses. And as we've learned throughout the course, when you need to decide what business to pick, you're going to compare them by looking at these ratios we've learned. And that is exactly what they were looking for, is just, simply take the assets divided by the sales or vice versa. And that's going to give us a ratio we can compare with the two businesses as a more accurate indicator of how well they're performing, as opposed to just looking at which one's got higher assets or which one's got higher sales. Okay, so that is, it's great to see most of you got that correct though. All right. We got, I think this is the last one. 20. So everyone have a go at this. Actually, never mind, there's two more after this for multiple choice. So we have another table, a lot of question marks this time.
Give people another 10 seconds or so.
Yeah, all good. I do know this one takes a bit of time to work out.
Cool. Okay, I'll show this.
All right. So we've got a majority of people saying D. A lot of people said C in this actually. So D ended up being the right answer here. And to calculate it, I'll just show you guys using the text. With this question, they haven't actually asked for, it's not typical. They haven't asked for the ratio using, let's say, sales and gross profit, dividing gross profit by sales to get the gross profit ratio. Instead, they've given you the gross profit ratio and asked you to find sales as one of the question marks. Cost of goods sold ends up being a bit irrelevant. The other question mark that's important here is the net profit, which we're going to look at our net profit ratio for. And you can see that involves sales. So the first thing we have to do is clearly use the gross profit ratio to figure out our sales. So we know that the gross profit ratio is given by our gross profit divided by sales. But if we need to find sales, we can rearrange this equation. So if you've done some level of maths until now, you would know that you can simply multiply like the sales at the bottom to the left-hand side and then divide the gross profit ratio down to rearrange it, making sales the subject. And you would have gross profit divided by gross profit ratio. So when you do that, you get 400,000 divided by our 66.7%. Now, this ratio, when you use it using numbers, remember how it gives you a decimal. So that means we shouldn't use the percentage here. We should actually use the decimal version of 66.7%. So converting that to a decimal will just be 0.667 that you plug in. And that would give you a sales of 600,000 roughly. It's like 590 something, high 500s, which is approximately 600K. So that means it's a C or D. I can understand why some of you might have put C if you ran out of time, which is perfectly fine. As a question 20, let's say you really want to move on and you don't really know what to do from here, definitely take your best guess out of the two. But once you've got your sales, it's not too difficult to then extend that to your net profit ratio, because we now just take our net profit. Sorry, we're not given net profit, my bad. We just now take our net profit ratio and rearrange that equation for net profit this time. So I'll put another text box here. I might check. Actually, I can't move that. So I'll put it here. All right, so our net profit ratio is given by net profit on sales, which means that we can rearrange that to make our net profit the subject of our equation. And to do that, we just multiply the sales across. So it becomes net profit equals net profit ratio times sales, which means we multiply our 600,000 by 50%. You don't actually even need to put that in a calculator. You know, 50% is half. So you just half your sales, and that's your net profit. So that's why you get D. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. I just need to exit this annotation. Okay, cool. Oh, that stuff didn't leave. I'll just rub it out. All right, cool. So have a read of these last two questions. I'll give you guys maybe another 2 minutes for that. We're going not too bad for time. Should get into HR and then cover the extended responses as well.
Might give people another 20 seconds or so just because it involves maths.
Yeah, might take a bit of time putting them in. Calculator. The first one's nice and easy with 19. Gross profit ratio. It's given to you there, and they've given, unlike the previous question, we've got everything we need in this one pretty much to calculate our gross profit.
Cool. All right, I'll share the first answer. Then
Yeah.
I'll put up a poll for the second afterwards.
Perfect. So most of you put B for this one, and that is correct. So using the information we have here, we can calculate our gross profit. So, and then we divide that by our sales. So taking 600,000 and subtracting our COGS. and equity and dividing by the sales. Once you've calculated your gross profit, you would get 66.6 or approximately 67%, 2/3 of your sales retained as a gross profit. And then the number of days that it takes the business to calculate its accounts receivable, that's more of the difficult question here, because I do know we learned in the syllabus the accounts receivable turnover ratio to be sales of accounts receivable, but there is an additional step that is actually not in the equation, which I wanted to highlight for you guys here. So try question 20 as well, and let me know what you guys get.
All right, I'll share that one.
Yeah, let's see them.
Cool.
So we've got most people saying B, and that is actually the correct answer. Some people said A, which is the bait here, because if you use the accounts receivable turnover ratio equation they've given there, if we do 600,000 and divide that by our accounts receivable of $41,000, that gives us 14.63. So you might say, oh, that's approximately 15. But keep in mind, dividing sales by accounts receivable, that's just all in dollars. So there's no reason that this would be an indication of the number of days it takes to collect our debts. To get the number of days, what we actually need to do is divide 365 by our answer, because that's going to tell us how our financial year is going to be distributed to retain or to collect these debts as an average number of days. So we do 365 divided by our answer of 14 point whatever it was, and that gives us 24.9, which is approximately 25. And that's in days because we divided 365 days by our ratio. So that gives us B as the answer. All right, great. So we'll move on to the short answer. Example for finance. We've got pretty much straight like syllabus. I don't know, you could say they've rearranged the words of the syllabus to make the question. They haven't even got a scenario in this question, which means it's very theory focused. All right, so we've got why is liquidity an objective of financial management first, and then how could a business improve management of its accounts receivable turnover? Those two very theory based. And then the last part C, says a business has decided to expand into a large factory and now is considering its financial options. Discuss the use of leasing and mortgages as source of long-term finance. Okay, so with the first one, part A, why is liquidity an objective? Our key verb being why means we want to explain and justify. Keywords being liquidity and objectives of financial management. We should open with what liquidity is. Liquidity is the ability to pay short-term debts as they fall due. So liquidity is an objective of financial management because by being liquid, a business can maintain a good credit rating, avoid late fees, and avoid additional interest payments as they can meet their short-term repayments using cash on hand, for example. So that's demonstrating why liquidity is fitting into our objectives of financial management, why it's something we want to aim for. That's what an objective is. All right, so that's nice, easy to marker. The next part, which was how could a business improve management of its accounts receivable turnover? We want to firstly start with what accounts receivable turnover shows. So it indicates how long it takes the business to collect money from its debtors, just like how we calculated for that business in the multiple choice question. So this could be achieved by using factoring as our example that we've brought up here. And factoring, we should define now because we've introduced it, involves selling accounts receivable to a financing company at a discounted price so that the business can receive cash in hand and avoid needing to chase up those debtors. So factoring is when you basically tell another business to do your debt collecting for you. And as compensation, they take a commission on that. So we can say these, however, are a cost to the business because that business you're handing your duties of collecting debts from other people to is now going to have to do work to do that. And they're not going to do it for free. So it's going to cost you as a business asking this other business to do it for you. Now, the business that's offering, how do we say these, however, cost to the business, and the business offering a shorter interest-free period is another, we can introduce this as another point that can improve its accounts receivable turnover. Because if we look back at the question, it just says, how could a business improve? It doesn't actually say what's one way or what's two ways. And if you can see that you're starting to look at the 3-4 markers, it's probably safer to include multiple things. Maybe just putting on the end another reason and briefly describing that. So we can say another method. We can say the business offering a shorter interest-free period will also improve its accounts receivable turnover because this is a form of offering discounts for early payment. So that's the keywords from the syllabus, which improves the accounts receivable turnover. All right. And then part C, our 5 marker here. So this is where you want to spend more time in your short answers by sitting down and maybe making more of a marking criteria on the side so that you can have a nice structured response. And if you get a discuss, I would say that you're pretty lucky because discuss questions are, they're very well prescribed, very clear on what you need to do, that you need to provide the points for and against, or the advantages and disadvantages. So in this case, they've asked you about both mortgages and leasing. So we need to talk about both of those. And if we simply give our two advantages for mortgages and disadvantages for mortgages, then our advantages for leasing, disadvantages of leasing, then that's already at least 4 marks. And this relates to kind of what someone said in the Q&A before, how do we make it from a band 5 to a band 6 answer? I guess with this, just having more advantages and more disadvantages could help. And also by having that structure of where you're talking about the mortgages first and then the leasing, you can go one step up and offer some kind of conclusive remarks about which one you think is better. That might not get rewarded because it's not an evaluate or anything like that, but it is also showing you, showing your marker that you're thinking more about this. So always going up in the hierarchy of keywords is completely fine if you have time. So anyway, to go through this answer, we've got a mortgage. The definition of a mortgage, it's a loan that we use to finance property purchases, such as the new premises or factory this business needs. So we're relating it to the question. One advantage of using a mortgage is that the loan is secured by the property. And another advantage is that the business will end up owning that property once it's fully repaid. Mortgages are disadvantages, however, because of the bank charges that it entails and the interest that has to be paid on it. Now with leasing, this is the hiring of an asset or a property in this case that would allow this business to use it in return for payments over a set period of time. So advantage of this include that the business does not need to pay for maintenance of that building and the lease payments are going to be tax deductible. Additionally, repayments are fixed over a period, which means that it allows for easier monitoring of cash flow. You can see when there's regular outflow of your lease that this is an amount of money I need to pay. It's not as variable as a mortgage can be, which can have variable interest rates. So the main disadvantage of leasing is that the business will not own the property at the end of the lease period, and leasing also tends to incur the high interest rates. Because of that fixed nature of it, it tends to actually sometimes end up being more costly, and you don't end up keeping it as the main disadvantage. All right, we might move on to our question time. There were a couple of other questions that I wanted to answer, but feel free to keep popping them in. Do this for maybe 3-ish minutes so we can move on. So it says, there was one here, what's the easiest way to revise 50 pages of study notes? There isn't really an easy way. I would say you have to be firstly motivated. You need to remind yourself why you're doing this. You're not you're not going to do it if you don't know why you're doing it. So maybe have that target goal in mind of like a certain score you want, or a certain band that you want to achieve, and also dedicate the time. So plan out the time that you need to actually achieve that goal. So say, like throughout this week, I'm going to spend an hour a day on business, or you could do it slightly differently, maybe 2 hours on 3 separate days. And that could seem like a lot or not enough, depending on how you guys study. But leading up to your HSC now, it's pretty much the final stretch. So there isn't like an exam to study for afterwards. So I don't see why you wouldn't prioritize that now if you want to do well. But yeah, I guess 50 pages of study notes. It sounds like a lot, but trust me, it's not as much as you think. So keep in mind, there's always more and more information out there, and there are people that have to learn much more. So just know that at least you've got the content there in front of you now, and it's a matter of maybe reviewing it for your exam. The other thing I wanted to say is you don't need to know everything. I just to reiterate that you don't have to know everything inside and out. If you become a little bit more skilled in adapting your knowledge to the question, it eases a lot of the pressure off, because it means you let the day count a bit more, make it a little bit more on the day about how you respond to those questions. Why is leasing interest rates higher than purchasing? So the thing with leasing is that the interest rates are kind of embedded into it. It's not really an interest rate. It's sort of an upmarked price that you're paying. And the reason for that is because by leasing this property out to you, the owner has made it quite easy. And to safeguard themselves against any losses, they're going to account for the higher interest rates that they might have to pay if they were mortgaging the property themselves and then leasing it out. But I guess, yeah, just remember, as if something is made easy for you and you're paying this fixed cost, it probably means on the other end of it, someone's accounting for the fact that sometimes it might go up when they have to pay. So they're making sure the tenant is paying as much as possible to safeguard themselves. All right, maybe one more if I'll have a brief look. Sorry, answered that one. You can make some facts up. You can't make up a business entirely. It should be well known, and you should have some aspects that are true that you've learned. But with the statistics especially, you can modify them and make them up. What was some strategy you used in the exam managing time? Which parts did you start with? So I actually covered this at the beginning, and I'm happy to go back to that slide, maybe now next question time. I did it in order. So I did multiple choice. And like I said, with reading time, I spent maybe the latter half of reading time, the last 3 minutes of reading time, doing the first 5 questions. Because with business, a lot of them just pop out to you. The answer just quite clearly, very short question. The answer is just there straight from the syllabus. The other ones where you need to sit down and work out, that's where you focus during your multiple choice time, which I did first. So I spent about 15 minutes on that. And then I spent about an hour to an hour 10 on the short answers, finished all those so that I had time left for my 2 essays, approximately 15 minutes for each. All right, cool. So let's move on for now. So with human resources, I've got less multiple choice questions, so don't worry. We'll try get through this, and then I'll cover some of the extended response tips as well before we wrap up. So maybe only give you guys a minute, and just whoever answers will answer. There's only 3 multiple choice, so it should be fine.
Cool, we give people 10 more seconds. It seems like most people have an answer, so I will share it now.
All right, let's see. Yep, most people said A, which is correct. The casual employee should be let go of first. 19% said a 66-year-old employee. So while that might be tempting for some reason, that's not fair in that case. What we have to be wary of in this question is to not discriminate based on a certain feature they've stated about one of those employees. So if they're talking about the employee being pregnant or their age, that's generally going to be eliminated as a correct answer, because otherwise that means they're giving way for you to be discriminating these employees, and they wouldn't do that when making this question. So according to the one of the laws you learn, I think it's the Sexual Discrimination Act, you can't fire someone because they're pregnant. So that's out of our choices as well. So it really comes down to casual employees and part-time employees. And if we're thinking about the written contracts for each of these, it's actually part of the casual employees' risks that they could be let go of without that much notice. So in this case, if you're comparing a casual employee and a part-time employee has more, a few more of the legislations backing them up and a few more benefits to being part-time employment. So in that case, A would be the correct answer if they're just a casual employee. All right. And I think this is the last multiple choice. Yeah, next one's short answer. So have a read of this, maybe 2 minutes for you guys to look through. I've tried to give you another more of a problem-solving question as opposed to just straight up theory, kind of like the last one, even though it was a worded question, you could say it's a bit more problem-solving because it's applying what you learned. A lot of multiple choice questions, however, are just straight up theory. And I've tried to veer away from those for today.
Give people another 15 seconds or so.
Yeah.
4:17. All right, cool.
All right. Let's see what they said. So most people said D for question 17, which is actually the right answer here. So it says which business is likely to compromise work safety in return for an increase in output. So the first thing we should notice in this table is the rows. So absenteeism, accidents per 500 employees, percentage of staff turnover, and average output per employee. If we're looking at a business that's compromising work safety, we're looking at one with high accidents per 500 employees in this case. So it's probably going to be A or D then, not necessarily B or C, because they have less accidents. Then the next part of the question says, in return for an increase in output. So that's when we should turn our attention to the last row, which shows us the average output per employee. And you can see when comparing A and D, D has a higher output of 14, whatever units that is. But the point is, when comparing D to A, they both had relatively high accidents, but D's output seems to be high still, nonetheless, which means that what they're probably doing in this case, if we're to compare these businesses and see which one is most likely to be sacrificing safety for increasing in output, not really caring about their employees, would be D, which is what most of you put. All right. What about question 18? Which one is most likely to be managing their human resources most effectively? What do you guys think using those numbers?
Cool. All right. I think I'll end that poll and share the results.
Yeah, perfect. So most of you said B, and that is the correct answer. So it says which one is likely to be managing the human resources most effectively. If we look at our percentage of staff turnover, we've got B and C being the lowest. What you can actually do with this kind of question is maybe even mark with your pencil or whatever, your pen, in the exam, which ones of these are good to be higher and which ones are good if they're lower. So for example, absenteeism, you're looking at numbers that are lower. That's better if your employees are less, taking less days off. So for example, B and D in that case would be the better businesses. Accidents per 500 employees, we wanted that to be low as well. B is clearly lower, so we're still leading the race. Percentage of staff turnover, we want lower turnover, so 9%, still out of those four, that's the lowest number there, so B is looking good. And then average output per employee, 14 is the highest there, so B pretty much is the winner in all those categories, and without dispute, it's the best or most likely to be managing the human resources effectively. Okay, cool. So let's go on to the SAQ and rocket through this one so we can get to some info about the essays as well. So we've got annual staff survey at a large retail store who's revealed that employees are unmotivated and management does not listen to their suggestions and is unwilling to change. Management is concerned that many employees may leave the company and has brought in a consultant to manage the change, which is presumably the student answering this. So part A, outline the strategic role of human resources in the business. And then B says, demonstrate how leadership style has affected employee performance. Part C, justify one human resource management process to improve workplace culture. Okay, so for part A, outline strategic role of human resources. Our key verb being outline means we're just sketching in general terms. We don't need to go into that much detail, but we do want to satisfy our 2 marks. And to do that, we should introduce what our strategic role of human resources actually entails. So whenever you see the strategic role, you're looking at the overarching goals of the business. So that's why we say the strategic role of human resources is in this retail store is to meet the overarching goals of the business and customer expectations. The retail store should acquire, develop, and maintain staff to create a positive business culture which emphasizes, or with an emphasis, on customer care. Because this will supplement the business's wider goals surrounding customer satisfaction, repeat sales, and having good reputation. So you've related that to the wider business goals, and that's really what the strategic role is about. And we've related to the scenario. And we've definitely sketched in general terms, if not more, how that's relevant to our question as to why it's important in this business. Okay, question 22B, we now need to demonstrate how leadership style of this business has affected employee performance. So I decided to actually include this question because of this word. It's a little bit rarer, demonstrate, but so that you guys are prepared for it, it's basically just showing through an example. Demonstrate. If someone asks you to demonstrate how to administer an EpiPen or something, you need to show it by doing it. So what that means is we want to bring up an example. So in this case, our keywords would be leadership style and performance. And our answer can start with our definition of leadership style, but should focus on 1 or 2 particular styles. And if you look at the marking criteria, you can see it says provides a relevant example. So you don't really need to go on with multiple. If you just go into depth about one and how that's relevant here, then that should give you your 3 to 4 marks. So leadership style refers to the ways that managers communicate with their employees and inspire and motivate them to work together in achieving an organization's goals. Leadership style influences corporate culture, productivity, and motivation of employees, which all accumulate to determine employees' performance. For example, the autocratic management style might be used in this business, and this would entail planning, organizing, controlling, and deciding quickly without input from staff, and instead passing on orders in a long chain of command. So you've described the autocratic leadership style, introduced our example of it, and now we need to relate it to this business. So we say, in this business, with perhaps young employees, this leadership style might intimidate employees, which can result in high levels of stress and consequently employees may be less productive and less effective in undertaking their duties, which can lead to demotivating feedback under this autocratic style of leadership, further worsening performance. So we've related to performance and even introduced this like concept of how it could be a negative feedback, positive feedback loop, where when they're doing badly, that's going to lead to more stress and that's going to lead to lower performance, which is going to then come back using this autocratic leadership style. It's going to come back in a bad way to reflect or motivate them. All right, cool. The last one, 22 part C, says to justify the use of one human resource management process to improve culture. So keywords in this one being one, human resource processes, and business culture. Key verb here is justify, which means we need an argument. We need supporting evidence or backing up our claims. So development as a human resources process can improve the culture of this workplace. That's what we've picked as our human resource process. The retail store can use the survey results to identify areas of improvement in order to develop their staff. For example, they may offer further professional development in areas of team building, communication, skills, or management to motivate their staff. And as a result, their staff morale may improve and could reduce potential staff turnover. Therefore, the positive culture will improve and the business will maintain its employees in the long term. So that's how we've related to the business culture. And in this example is that we have enhanced morale and we've got lower turnover as an indicator that reflects that better culture. All right, we might go to our last question time. I might answer a few things before we go into our essays. If it's cool and you guys aren't doing much, if you stick around for maybe an extra 10 minutes, which should be enough to go through that. All right, so let's see, how much time did you send a response? Just answer maybe one question. Why can't you fire a pregnant employee? They're going to leave work anyway, so why not just get it over early? You can't base your decision on who to fire based on who's going to be likely to keep working or who's not. And also that's up to the discretion of the employee. They might like to continue working after their maternity leave has ended. So while they might take leave, that's not enough grounds to justify firing them for that. How much did you write for the extended response questions? I would say fill up the booklet. It really depends. I don't know how many words I wrote, but I do know that when I practiced, like when I had my notes open, or then later on when I would do the practice papers, I would maybe write like 8 pages, 6 to 8 pages. And my handwriting is like decent on the bigger end. But if you fill up more pages, it is slightly an indication that, you know, you've got a better response. But that's not to say they just take that and say, okay, cool, this is a great response. They're going to definitely read it. And you need to support that with everything else. You need to have a high quality response in terms of your structure, in terms of the terminology. So you can't just get away by, you know, big writing and getting through all those pages. Just make sure it's a complete response. That's the most important. Don't have cliffhangers. Also, don't ask yourself too much of yourself, because I know when I would like do my planning, I maybe had a few extra points that I never would have the time to write. But you just need to adapt to that time pressure and wrap up what you're writing, and then do your conclusion if that's the case. As long as you hit the key dot points, which is what we'll look at soon, that's going to put you in the higher bands, as opposed to having a lot of detail in only part of the question. All right, cool. So we might go to the next part then, just because we're running low on time. So with this one, I've got a finance and marketing business report. We've got Sporty's Goods Ltd, being a retailer that's been operating for the past 20 years in Australia. Their directors have provided the following information. So in 2013, we've got the business issuing new shares on the Australian Securities Exchange, expanding its retail activities internationally. The business is facing increasing competition. The directors are concerned about positioning of their product in the market, and the directors want the business to operate for the benefit of shareholders in the long term. Then they've got this very vague, but anyway, financial data about Sporty's Goods. They don't have numbers, but all you really need to do is look at the trends in sales and profits. That's what they want you to do here. And I picked this question because it's a bit more unique in that they have this graph as part of it. And something like this might come up, might not, might just be a table. Sometimes they give you like the tables we had in multiple choice for finance, your sales and cost of goods sold, so that you can do maybe some calculations and include that in your report. But the point is, if they do give you a graph or a pictorial, it's not a declaration. It's there for you to discuss, and it's for them to see who's going to actually engage with this, as opposed to just writing whatever they know. And that's the main point of this business report anyway, is to write a report that's very specific to this business. All right, and then the questions, which I've got on the right side, are really what we need to focus on here. So when making our report, we have to have a section that outlines a strategic role of financial management. We have to recommend 2 strategies that improve financial performance, and we have to explain monitoring and controlling in marketing. So that's what I meant before with like how long your essay is. It's not nearly as important as having a complete response. I would say aim for writing almost constantly. So it's fine to stop and think now and again, but if you have long breaks, you're going to find that you either don't get through all the content, or you're just not going to have a very complete looking response, even if you sort of hit every point. So it's definitely a balance between hitting every point and having sufficient detail. And I think just practicing getting into the flow of writing, and letting maybe your marking criteria that you draw up first, a little plan, guide you as you do that, will make sure you hit those things. All right, so to break down this question, we know that they're a sports retailer. We know that they're in the post-maturity to maturity stage because they're 20 years old. It's not like they're newly established or in growth. In fact, they're starting to decline, and we want to try and avoid that. We know that in 2013, 4 years ago, the ASX IPO of this company was released, so the initial public offering, and they expanded globally. You should relate all of these facts to your graph within your response as well. So with that graph, we've got clearly an increase in sales and profits in 2013. So after that ASX listing and their global expansion, it was going great, except it only lasted about a year. And that's something you can comment on. It was relatively short-lived, and they started to decline more slowly. And when I say more slowly, I'm relating that to basically like the gradient here is not as steep as before their public offering. So you can say they're slowly going into decline, as opposed to when they were crashing before that public offering, which means that's something that was probably positive for the business, even though they're declining now. It just means that they need to pick up speed again. All right, with the other points they had there's competition they're facing. They are worried about their product positioning, and specifically, they want their shareholders as the priority stakeholders to be benefited in the long term. All right, cool. So what I'm going to say is basically just a few things about each section here. So with our executive summary, overall, this should be kind of familiar to you guys by now. You would have your executive summary, and then you can number your main sort of body of your report by having, let's say, 1 as the strategic role, 2 as the financial management strategies, 3 as the monitoring and controlling. So that's your 3 points that they had in the question. Then as your subpoints, you do your picking and choosing. So for example, with financial management strategies, out of the options you have, you should think about what's most relevant and what you know more about. So those are the 2 factors there. What is actually going to help this business if you were to help them? And 2, how much do I know about it? So for example, in this one, profitability management strategies is what you would go into. You can clearly see that in the graph, they're talking about their profit. So it's going to be very easy for you to refer to that and constantly say, this strategy is going to be good because it's going to improve their profits, and related to the graph in that way. And the other one was global financial management that I would pick for this, because we know that they've recently, or in 2013, they've expanded to a global market. So there's going to be relevant strategies in that landscape as well. With the actual details of what you do in each body paragraph, you should focus on organizing the information specifically relating it to the business. So with all your sentences, you should be saying like Sporty's goods, and you can use an acronym like SG, should implement the profitability management strategies of blah, blah, blah. And then you go into each one. And pretty much here is where your studying comes in, because you don't have that much to go by using the scenario, except for relating it back. So you're going to need to remember what comes under profitability management, what comes under global financial management. But the good thing is you don't need to talk about all of it, and it's unrealistic to talk about all of it. So you can pick and choose what you remember more about, and prioritize that in your question. But the main takeaway is really, if you're relating it to these points that we drew up earlier, if you're relating it to the graph especially, I have no idea what just happened, you're going to be differentiating yourself from band 5 to band 6. And that's answering one of the questions from a while ago. How do we do that? Well, it's a matter of trying to engage with this as much as possible. And the more you can be more formal and have that correct terminology in your responses, the better it is. All right. And then your conclusion is just where we wrap up. What I've got here is just a sample section with the strategic role of financial management. You would say what strategy is. It refers to the long-term broad aims affecting all business areas. The strategic role for each key business function involves management of each function, contributing to the strategic direction or strategic plan of the business. And this would be as a paragraph, by the way, but I've just separated it. Developing a strategic plan involves determining strategies that a business will use to achieve its long-term goals and ensure it survives and grows in a competitive business environment. So you can see that's all very theory-based. And what I've done here is just included some points that I might bring up as my theory first. But really, there should be a lot more relating going on, which I haven't done yet. In this next sentence, how we can see that we're talking about SG. So the strategic goals of SG's financial management will involve setting financial objectives, such as target shareholder dividends, and ensuring the business is able to achieve these goals. And that's relating them to one of their concerns. And here I've just got some other dot points that you can talk about under strategic role of financial management. You can bring up how they source their finance. You can bring up how well they prepare their financial statements and do their budgeting and forecasting. And with the cash flow, you can relate the cash flow to how well they can conduct their daily operations and make sure, let's say if they're going to embark on some kind of marketing, global marketing venture, that they have enough cash on hand to do that. So keep in mind, this is an outline part of the section. So the way you should divide how much quantity you have and how much depth you have for each of the sections of your report is going to be determined by the key verbs still. So outline, sketch in general terms. You don't need more than a page at most. That half a page would be enough. Recommend 2 strategies. Recommending can be a little bit more vague in terms of how in-depth you need to go with this, especially because it's kind of like in the middle of our things that we need to do here. You can spend a decent amount of time, especially since you've got 2 strategies to talk about. So dive into those, and always back up everything you're saying. So they should do this because, even though it says recommend, treat it as if it's explained. And then the last part, explain the importance of monitoring and controlling the business's marketing strategy. That one I would maybe perhaps have another page or 2 at most to talk about monitoring and control under that. All right. Just very briefly about the extended response. So this is the case studies one, and I know some of you wanted advice on this. So an example question would be something like this: evaluate the importance of operation strategies in achieving competitive advantage. Again, I would normally do this. I would have my executive summary. I would have performance objectives, outsourcing technology numbered just like a business report, and conclusion just like a business report. It's just some of the language is slightly different. I would say you become a little bit more philosophical and relating it to the modern landscape, like in the modern business world, businesses are faced with blah, 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 as opposed to being directly consulting the business in the business report for section 3. But the other question would be like, how do you structure your case studies around that? And what I would do, I think I alluded to this earlier, is I would have my main paragraph of the theory, and then following that, following every sub point, I would have a case study. So in this example, for quality, I would have a case study. For speed, I would have a case study. And then for outsourcing, if I can see that I have a main subheading standalone like that, I know in the syllabus it's cut into advantages and disadvantages, but that might not be as relevant in this case because we don't really have to provide a discussion. It's still a really good idea to demonstrate your understanding of the syllabus, to say what are the advantages of outsourcing and what are the disadvantages. But the question here says evaluate. So ultimately, after we've got given that discussion, which is probably a good idea to do, you need to suggest whether this is a good strategy or not, and whether a business in general would benefit by doing this. And then in your case studies, you evaluate them within that paragraph. So you evaluate that strategy, or for example, for outsourcing for Apple, you could talk about how them outsourcing their production to Foxconn is advantageous because they can achieve economies of scale. However, because of the reduced capabilities of monitoring over the quality that they have and the monitoring of staff and their workers, their working conditions, it has led to some backlash. So, and then you give your judgment, it's overall, it has still worked favorably for Apple, but they need to keep in mind to maintain their corporate social responsibility. So that's usually how you would wrap up your case study paragraphs. And then for technology, you would just repeat. So a lot of this is just learning the structure and repeating that. And when your marker sees that structure, and when they see the correct terminology, and they see a complete response, executive summary to conclusion, and you've hit all your points. With this one, it's not as clear as the business report. It's more flexible because you've just got to talk about whichever strategies you like. It just comes down to maybe talking about 2 or 3 in depth. Going more than 3 is a bit excessive. So I would suggest stick to around 3 things if it's that open-ended. All right, that was just a sample I put in here, not related directly to this question, but just the kind of layout. So you'd have, if performance objectives is my main strategy, I would have a little sort of introductory statement about that. And then I would go into my sub points about quality. And then under quality, I have different levels of it. So I've got quality of design, quality of conformance, quality of service. And then I've got my IKEA case study at the bottom of all that, just for quality. And then I would talk about the speed example of performance objectives. All right, just some final things with multiple choice. Make sure you read it carefully. A lot of them, like I said before, will jump out at you, but that doesn't mean rush. It just means while you're doing it, back yourself and be confident that you know it. Most of the time, your gut feeling will be right. But other times you do need to sit down and think about it. Most of it won't be trying to trick you. Be very familiar with the syllabus structure, especially for short answers. Whenever you think back to what the keywords of this question are and relate to the syllabus, and if you remember it very well and know the subheadings, that's going to guide your response very easily. So I think some of you are asking, how do you memorize 50 pages of notes? If you memorize the syllabus or just how everything is laid out, you can leave a lot of it up to expanding on the spot. So just know the keywords, the subheading and subheading under subheading, and that will be so much easier to learn as opposed to word for word your entire 50 pages of notes. Whenever there's a scenario in a short answer or a business report, make sure you explicitly relate to it as much as possible. And the more you engage with that, the better your response is going to be overall, the more you're differentiating yourself from others. Make sure you use the appropriate terminology, use cohesive sentences and logical paragraphs in those extended responses. For case studies, make the points malleable. Like, for example, with me talking about Foxconn, that's very legitimate, but then I could have made up things about their turnover rates. Like in 2015, they had a staff turnover rate of 20% because of significant benzene poisoning that was rumored within the workplace. But in 2016, they managed to mitigate the issues and reassure staff that their working conditions will be healthier, so that reduced their turnover, something like that. Quantity is important, but it's so that you make sure you're not fluffing about. try to make sure everything you're saying is a unique point, or at least supporting it, not just repeating it. What else is there? If you're making up your statistics or facts, practice making it seem legit. And that's going to come from reading more, not necessarily memorizing more information, but even just, scanning through. There's so many resources that have already been prepared. And if you scan through those that your school has provided you with, like Qantas or Apple, whatever it is, or IKEA, then that's going to help you get that terminology into your head. And if you practice writing neat and fast, that's going to help you a lot on the exam day. And try to complete as many timed past exam papers as possible, which simulate the exam condition as closely as possible. So you want to simulate the time, the maybe even like what you're wearing, the quietness. You want to try and do it in a place where you're not disturbed. And also the fact that you're not given notes. You eventually want to do a few practice runs where you don't have notes in front of you. All right, but the most important thing is the day you'll be okay. Just keep in mind, you have learned a lot. And if you're worried about an exam leading up to it, just be confident that, you can make things up on the spot, and you can suddenly improve. Even though you shouldn't be leaving that until the last minute, you should reassure yourself that you know enough to answer these questions by that time. But that's not to say there isn't time anymore. You still have quite a few, I think maybe 3 or 4 weeks until the business exam or your other HSC subjects. So feel free to contact KIS Academics. You can just scan that for group lessons. There's a lot of resources there already, and so many friendly tutors. Depending on our availabilities, we can all lend a helping hand in this final stretch for you. And yeah, that's pretty much it from me. If you want to add anything, Manoj.
No, thanks everyone for coming. We'll be sending out an email a bit later with just some feedback and some links to a bit more info about Alan's profile, grouped lessons, that kind of stuff. And in a few days' time, we'll make sure to have the slides up somewhere, as well as the YouTube video up of the entire lecture, so you guys can rewatch it and go over the actual PowerPoint as well in your own time when you need to. But other than that, I think we've covered everything. Huge thanks to Alan for putting together such a good presentation and some really great questions as well. So I hope you guys found it useful. If you have any feedback, etc., feel free to send it to us via the Q&A, or even down the line, we'll send a bit of a survey to you to get some feedback. Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll hang around for 2 more minutes just in case any questions and stuff pop up. But otherwise, yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys at one of the lectures in the next few days as well, because we do have a few more subjects coming up.
Perfect.
Cool.
See if there's any last minute questions they want now.
Yeah. I think you've answered a lot. There might be a couple.
No problem. You're welcome. My pleasure. Well, thank you.
Cool. All right. Done. We might end it there. Thanks, Alan, and thanks everyone for attending.
All right. Thank you.
See you guys.